What do you swear you saw, but don't have any proof of? Story 1. I saw a fox chasing a turkey on a hot summer day. They both tired out and stopped running at the same time and laid down to rest. Then they got up to continue the chase after about a minute. Some absolute cartoon nonsense that I swear happened, but I wouldn't believe me either. In the same vein, I once saw 3 fat-as-hell wild turkeys cluck across our backyard in marching order, one right after the other. The kicker, it happened on Thanksgiving Day. About 5 to 6 years ago, I had a job delivering propane. One day, I was in a very rural area dragging the hose down the remaining 75 or so feet of the driveway that was too narrow to back down. I kept hearing turkey sounds. As I got closer to the back of the house and maybe about 25 or so feet behind the house, there was an old stone wall that was in the woods. It's New England, so the walls are everywhere. Anyway, I had a view from the side of a single file line of turkeys, probably about 30 or more, walking through a path and hopping up and onto and over the wall. It was wet snowing, and there was maybe 1/4 of an inch of that on the ground. Every single turkey that hopped down from the wall slipped and fell. Some landed on their asses. Some fell forward onto their faces. Some on their sides. Some onto each other. Then they'd get up and keep walking. It was the last time I ever left my phone in the truck while filling a tank. Had a cat that was chasing a squirrel, both running. The squirrel saw me and stopped, frozen. Either the cat or the squirrel stood there panting for about a minute till I made a slight move when breathing. Then the squirrel turned its head and saw the cat and started running. The chase was back on, across the yard and around the bushes till finally up a tree. Funniest stuff I'd seen that cat do. Story 2. Sitting at the campsite, a beaver walks out of the lake on its hind legs and proceeds to walk like this through the campsite and into the woods like it's on its way to Pooh's house or whatever, just strolling. I had a beaver do that while I was night fishing. Walked out of the water on its hind legs less than 6 feet from me, dropped a load of mud on the sandbar, turned around and walked back into the water. Paid no attention to me at all. My friend years ago was sitting in a park reading a newspaper near a pond. There were swans in the pond/river, and a bridge leading to the other side of the water. My friend decided it was time to go, and stood up, and then one of the swans walked out of the water and stopped my friend from leaving the site. So he sat back down, and the swan went back in the water. Later, the situation with the swan repeated, and then once more, at last, my friend got enough and eventually left. The next day, he was in the park again, and there was a group of people and a commotion. A person walking on the bridge spotted a dead man underwater, next to the bridge, directly below where the swan was swimming the previous day. My wife and I were fishing, and she was on an old train bridge overhead of me, and I was standing almost chest deep in the water below. She says, "Oh look, a beaver is swimming towards you," all excitedly pointed down in front of me. I saw its wake in the water, and it disappeared about 20 feet away from me. I figured it saw me and dove under to get away. Nope. Suddenly I feel a tugging at my waist, and I'm like, what the fuck? And I look down and the bastard is under the water, carefully gnawing on the big-ass yellow perch I caught earlier off my stringer at the tail. The bastard robbed me. This reminded me of a beaver interaction my family had. We were camping on a lake, and a beaver came into our camp and sat next to our fire with us like he was a part of the party. We left him alone, and he stayed for hours. We got up and walked around him. He never moved, just watched us calmly freak out over this seemingly wild animal just hanging out with us. I have proof in pictures and video, and my kids love to tell the story. Story 3. Was living in Japan in a city called Miyazaki. Was watching TV around Christmas season. The MRT was about 10 p.m. at night. There was a station ID break, and it ended with a full-screen large-type message in English. Merry Christmas, F.U. This was 1993. Hello there, I am living in Japan as well. There is a popular song called Merry Christmas F.U. by Japanese artist Jet Boys. Maybe they were just copy-pasting the song title, or were playing that song during the TV show. I used to teach English in China, and a lot of times my students, 3 to 8 years old, would often wear clothes that had English on them, but their parents clearly didn't know what they said. One mom wore a black baseball cap that had the F word in giant R.L. Stine Goosebumps font, and one child came in wearing a t-shirt that said, "At least I don't do crystal meth in the bathroom." I nearly died trying to hold in my laughter. There was a Japanese TV show that used puppets to teach English. They had a song called "Where Is It?" to help teach prepositions. So, where is it? Where is it? Where is my coffee mug? The coffee mug is on my desk. You get the idea. Well, one day we had this exchange between a talking badminton racket and a toaster oven. The racket, "Where is it? Where is it? Where is my shuttlecock?" Toaster oven, "Your shuttlecock is in my mouth! Your shuttlecock is in my mouth!" I guess the writers were native English speakers and in a mood. Story 4. A lion at my parents' house when I was a kid. My older brother saw it too. Coincidentally, a lion went missing from the zoo in Ohio around that time and was never found. My brother and I swore we saw it, but obviously had no proof. That winter, my parents found giant paw prints outside that definitely were not a dog, cat, coyote, etc. Years later, when I was a freshman in high school, my friend's mom was driving me home and swore she saw a lion run across the road my parents live on. She never even knew the story about me swearing there was a lion out there. She was so convinced that she immediately called the police. That was all the proof I needed to know I was never crazy and knew what I saw as a kid. It was 2004 to 2006 or so when my brother and I saw it, prior to the 2011 Zanesville, Ohio incident. The spotting by my mom's friend was around 2012. This is a scary story. I went to visit my grandparents in rural Mexico about a year ago. They live in a small town deep in the mountains. During the night, I had to sleep in a very far eastern part of the house. I swore I heard lions roar. I told my parents and cousins about it, and everyone made fun of me. Every night, I would hear a group of lions roar, but I would have to be very quiet to hear them, because they were quite far away. So after 4 days, I decided to investigate. I went walking to the back of the house into the woods when I finally reached a sort of ridge and was able to see a ranch at a distance away from me in town. I saw a group of 3 or 4 lions roaming inside the ranch. I ran back to tell my grandparents and they told me the lions were real. Turns out the Mexican cartel used them to get rid of bodies that needed to be disposed of. They would move the lions from ranch to ranch when the Mexican army came around and raided places, so after I took my cousins to see the lions, they were gone. When my grandpa was getting old and sick, he started telling wild stories about all sorts of things. One was about the time an elephant walked through his backyard and his mother's washing. We all nodded and said, "Oh yes, Grandpa, that sounds wild," not really believing. He grew up in Salt Lake City, Utah, after all. A few years after his death, we took my nephew to the Hoggle Zoo in SLC and read a plaque at the elephant enclosure describing how Princess Alice, the elephant, used to escape fairly regularly and take strolls down the mountains in the 40s. It happened at just the same time my grandpa remembered. He was right all along. My wife used to live near an exotic cat preserve, out on a couple of acres just outside city limits. She once went out for a run and then came back home. A few minutes after she got home from the run, her mom left for a store and there was an eviscerated cow at the end of their drive. A couple of days later, the exotic cat preserve announced that they'd briefly had an escape and had recovered the animal. Story 5. I saw an ivory-billed woodpecker in college. I'm not a bird enthusiast or anything, but I saw this giant woodpecker pecking weird and I watched it until it flew off. A day or two later, I saw on the news that one had been spotted near my area, and that was a big deal because they were declared extinct in 1944. I saw one too, in central Louisiana near the Texas border 30 years ago. I was 11 and I had a big Audubon guide on birds, and would spend hours birdwatching and identifying birds. We had a bunch of pileated woodpeckers on the property, tons of trees and dead trees, so I was already very familiar with them, but one day, I saw one with a black crest when I was out in the woods. I watched it for a good 10 minutes and then went home to get my guidebook because I'd never seen a pileated woodpecker with a black crest. I looked at the photos and was like, that's it, an ivory-billed woodpecker, and my dad told me I was a moron because those are extinct. He wouldn't come back out into the woods with me to look for it. I started keeping a camera on me, but of course I never saw it again. But I swear I am 100% certain of what I saw. The only thing it was close to in terms of size, woodpecker-wise, was a pileated, and it was not that. I got a long, clear look and it had a black crest. OMG, so did I. I was living in South Texas and riding my bike in the back wooded area along one of the bayous. The bird was on the ground, and I was so astounded by its size I got off my bike just to watch it. It poked around a bit, then hopped up into a tree, and then flew off. I went home and pulled out my bird book, and for the pileated woodpecker it showed a black and white speckled bird, just as large. I wondered why the book would show a speckled, usually immature, bird as the type specimen when the bird I saw was solid black. It wasn't till years later that I realized what I had actually seen. I'm still amazed every time I think of it. Story 6. A comet or something exploded into a giant green fireball when I was a kid. Edit. In no way did I think a throwaway comment before class would get this much attention. Seems like a lot of us have seen bolides or aliens. Most likely it was a meteor or a satellite, and it was too high up and not big enough to cause damage on the ground, the way the Chelyabinsk meteor did. Most meteors that we see range from the size of a grain of sand to maybe as large as a golf ball, and colors are less common than your typical white streak, maybe a little yellow like a halogen light. Green is the most common rare color, with blue, pink, and purple being rarer still. But satellites travel way slower than most meteors. You can track a satellite across the sky with your finger. 1, 2, 3, counting the seconds until it disintegrates or slows down enough to fall to Earth. But a meteor is often just a flash as it's obliterated by friction with the air, sometimes with a decent tail that hangs around in the upper atmosphere. This is a true story. About 20 years ago, I was with a bunch of friends on a beach in Florida at night. For whatever reason, we were telling ghost stories. In my turn, I started telling a normal ghost story with a normal ending about a killer in New Mexico that disappeared and haunts my old summer camp. It's one I heard and told at summer camp growing up. As I tell it, my friends are pretty into it, and all focused on me. At the exact climax of the story, which would have been about how the killer disappeared from his execution and haunted the woods around the camp to this day, I look up behind everyone and see a meteor completely break up into a massive green and yellow explosion. It was amazing. I shout, "Holy crap, look at that!" and point behind them all, and no one looked. They just all groaned and got mad that my story ended on a BS jump scare. I kept begging them to look, and they just all wandered off, cursing my bad storytelling. I'm still pissed about it. Story 7. Kathy Bates. I was working the closing shift at a Publix in Atlanta as a bagger, and I swear I saw her start to leave. I went up and went, "Excuse me, did you know that you look like—" The woman interrupted and went, "Kathy Bates? Yes, I know." Then she smiled and walked out of the store. My ex-girlfriend's mom looked a lot like Jamie Lee Curtis. So this woman at the gym goes up to her and says, "Hey, has anyone told you that you look like Jamie Lee Curtis?" And she was like, "Yeah, I get that all the time." Then the lady said, "Well, has anyone ever told you that you look like me?" It was actually Jamie Lee Curtis. No, this is not a made-up story. Susan Sarandon came into the Vermont deli I was working at in the summer of '96, shortly after winning Best Actress for Dead Man Walking, wearing the most casual just-woke-up attire, and no one in the shop recognized her but me. As I handed her order to her, I very quietly said, "Congratulations on your Oscar," and she immediately beamed and quietly replied, "Thank you." She and Glenn Close are the two worst famous women I have ever had to wait on in years of food service. But it was a restaurant shift, so many witnesses. LOL. Susan was so rude and demanding while also being dismissive, treating us like we were subhuman. Like she would do this hand wave thing like we were flies and that she was shooing away, after she would call us over and tell us what to get her. Never please, never thank you. Thankfully, I learned that she's like a lot of rude rich people, a regular who keeps coming back for some reason and a bad tipper. If I was rude and rich, I would never do it twice at a place where I have been an a-hole. Maybe because I know what can be done to food. Glenn Close was a pretty hardcore alcoholic, and I see why she keeps playing the same "if looks could kill" character. She does that in her real life. Sadly, I had to wait on her when she was getting separated and divorced, and she was extra crappy then, throwing silverware, and she made our new hire cry. We only knew thanks to my coworker who knew all the celebrity tea, and she told me a ton of stuff that she would overhear in AA meetings as well, which I won't repeat. And not famous, but Judy, Googled her, Judy Bowles, who was Sam Shepard's agent when he was alive, and that woman was a massive a-hole. She called Jessica Lange a mess in a dress and turned around to find me standing there. Ugh. She also admitted to cheating on her partner of 25 plus years. Judy does not have a quiet voice, who happens to be Audre Lorde's daughter, and she would complain about her wife's hoarding. And she called Jessica Lange names? Really, lady. But yeah, she was an a-hole. I need to find a server subreddit to trade war stories because I've written a thesis as my first comment on this account. Story 8. A corpse in a ditch on the side of the road. When I was a kid, I told my parents as we drove by and they got mad at me for having such a morbid imagination. Oh, that's sad. An unsolved murder in the area I grew up in was discovered when some kids on a school bus saw her body in the ditch as they drove by. Thank goodness the bus driver believed them. I'm sorry your parents didn't believe you. That's some trauma. I'll never forget the feeling of despair I felt as a kid when my parents didn't believe me when I woke them up in the middle of the night to tell them there were ghosts outside my window. I knew they were there. Turns out I'd seen the early flames of our neighbor's house burning down through my bedroom curtains. My parents woke up once they felt the heat and called the fire department. No one was home or was hurt in the fire, and I don't remember feeling any vindication, only anger that my parents didn't trust me. I was on a road trip with my family in the 80s. We stopped at a gas station to fill up. As we were pulling out, I thought I saw a man on fire. I said, "There's a man on fire." "No, there's not," they said. The original gaslighting, because I found out later that there was a man who lit himself on fire, self-immolated, right there at the gas station. They told me later on they saw it in the paper. Probably best not to hang around with the kids. So, I get it. It's stupid your parents didn't believe you because what would they have lost if they had? They could spend a few minutes turning the car around to confirm it and notify the police, or refute it and use it as a lesson. Heck, if there wasn't a body, they could have said, "You have to be careful about what you tell people. If you tell lies too often, people will stop believing you. So if there was a body there, we might have ignored you entirely and a person's death would go unreported and their family wouldn't get closure." Or, if you had mistaken a bag of trash for a body, they could have said, "Sometimes things aren't what they seem initially. You have to think critically and piece together all the little details to get the truth. And sometimes you're still not sure about something. It's okay to ask for help." Story 9. A Fruit of the Loom logo with a cornucopia, back in 1994. I need to talk about this because I remember when I was a kid and those ads were running. I got a Thanksgiving vocabulary worksheet. And I and one other girl got Jolly Ranchers for being the only ones to spell cornucopia right. The reason I remember this so vividly is because I then proceeded to walk around pointing out every cornucopia I saw for weeks to impress the adult masses. And I remember pointing out the Fruit of the Loom cornucopia to my neighbor like, "That's called a cornucopia. Want to know how to spell it?" I'm tired of being gaslit by big underwear. I had a whole elementary school arc about it and I'm not losing my mind. See, I don't believe in the Mandela effect, but this one actually really confuses me. I distinctly remember learning what a cornucopia was because of Fruit of the Loom. I can't imagine what other context I would have been exposed to for someone to tell me what a cornucopia was. I've thought about this one quite a bit, and I think I have somewhat of an explanation for everyone that remembers this. I grew up somewhat poor, so we bought clothes at swap meets and flea markets on a fairly regular basis. I'm pretty sure that the cornucopia in the Fruit of the Loom logo might have just been a knockoff brand that was sold on a large scale at such places, kind of like the US Polo Association or whatever that one was. But the quality was simply really bad, so there are no remaining examples in existence at this point. I'm not saying that's for sure the answer, but it would make sense considering that was around the time of the start of widespread knockoff brands. So, I know this is gonna sound weird, but I'm a guy in my 30s who wears tighty-whities and has been since high school. As in, I really like them, if you know what I mean. I also love buying vintage white briefs on eBay, especially FTLs. They are my favorite brand. I have several pairs I got on eBay from the 90s, and they came in the unsealed old-school package and everything. There's no cornucopia. There never has been. You can go on eBay yourself and see packs of Fruit of the Loom briefs with the logo, and it's just the fruit. I'm not sure where this all got started. I do have one theory, but I've been a big fan of FTL since the 90s and have never once seen them. I know the Mandela effect and have seen the old logo ad in a catalog clipping with the cornucopia, but it's most likely a fake, and there are people who purposefully made bootleg shirts with those tags now since. It's one of the more popular examples. Behind the Berenstain Bears and Shazam, take it from a guy like me. The cornucopia isn't a thing. Story 10. Nirvana in concert in a freaking gym in Bellingham, Washington in 1992. My college friend swears during a night of bar hopping we saw Nirvana in a dive skater bar in July 1989 in Carbondale, Illinois. It's an urban legend now, but my friend swears we were there and only a dozen or so people were there. I so wish I could remember that. I was there too. Carver Gymnasium, $2. They were the surprise act before Mudhoney. For the first couple of songs, I thought it was Mudhoney playing Nirvana covers. The girl I was with lost her shoe in the mosh pit. I remember us walking around Hagen Grocery after the show and her with her one shoe. Rolling Stone magazine mentioned the show and about all the shoes found on stage. I've always wanted to find video footage of that show. There used to be a punk club in Houston called The Abyss. Before they were well known, Nirvana opened for another band there, and when they were done playing, they went out into the crowd to enjoy the rest of the show. Kurt Cobain came up to a friend of mine, who didn't realize who he was at the time, and asked for a cigarette, and she said, "What do I look like, a cigarette dispenser?" I worked at the University of Washington Hospital for a bit, and my boss was a big grunge guy. He went to local shows as a teen and went to one at a local college one day. The band that was playing sucked, and everyone kept asking, "Who are they?" They wanted to get them off the stage. The band was Nirvana a year before Bleach came out. He also told me a time we were smoking weed with a dude who was promoting his band at one of these shows. Everyone kept ragging about his band's name. When my boss asked the guy's name, he said, "My name is Lane." He had some pictures from some of these venues. An old gym isn't too far off base from what he showed me. Story 11. I swear I saw a man walk backward up a hill and disappear. He went out of my line of sight as he walked behind a tree and never came out the other side. I checked the tree and everything. It scared the crap out of me. This one oddly scared me the most. Very creepy. I've seen people just disappear into the woods too. I was on a hike by myself when the entire forest just went completely silent all at once, and the sounds of all the birds and anything else were just suddenly replaced by the sounds of thousands of buzzing flies. That seemed like a bad sign at the time, so I just turned around and started walking back towards the start of the trail. I saw a guy wearing a blue t-shirt, gray/dark green cargo shorts, and a black watch walking towards me. White guy with a medium to large build. Never caught his face. It was blocked by the trees. I'm already freaked out by the change in noise, so I stop where I'm at and wait for him to pass. He walks behind a tree, doesn't pass the tree, never reaches me. I walked where he was walking. Nobody was there. Still hear the sounds of the flies buzzing around, but no flies in sight. Didn't see him in any direction. Didn't see any footprints and never saw him as I was walking back. No clue where he went. It's possible this was a sensory hallucination. There's a phenomenon where people having hallucinations will see people without faces, which is a giveaway that they're not real. Face recognition is a different and much more complicated part of the brain than recognizing humans from shape/stance, etc., apparently. Of note, this doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you. The brain is unreliable at the best of times. People start hallucinating within about 10 minutes in a sensory deprivation tank, and other experiences like feeling the presence of God are reported by ordinary people all the time, but tend to be triggered by similar events, i.e. hikers experience it quite readily when at high altitude. It's possible you were actually having a similar experience. People reporting the positive version report things like feeling the world is humming. A constructed guess would be that you were out alone in the woods and really did hear the birds go quiet, and that kicked off heightened awareness because that's a pretty good predator about indication. I'm wondering if something else happened as well, i.e. a temperature drop, or it was getting darker or something. We have a lot of additional sensory cues which trigger something's wrong. The sound of flies buzzing would have been your brain cranking the auditory awareness all the way up. And the man approaching and disappearing is an overfit of sensory data because your brain was basically trying to find anything that looked like a saber-toothed tiger, which would have been hunting our ancestors. Interesting. I was way up in the mountains, well over a mile above sea level. I'd been living there for a while though, and it was a hike I'd done plenty of times, certainly much more plausible than Skinwalker Guy's conclusions, and I really appreciate you mentioning this. It definitely could be the case. While I don't necessarily believe in skinwalkers or Wendigo, I do have First Nation Cree friends who do. Some very, very sensible, down-to-earth people. The truth is probably a mixture of the two. Deep spiritual beliefs spawn from the tricks of human psychology that prey upon your senses when you spend a lot of time in the woods. There's a lot to be said about what defines reality when you are alone with only your own subjective perceptions in wild areas. Story 12. Ball lightning. Back when I was a kid, I remember my mom telling a story about how she saw a ball of lightning roll across the backyard when she was a kid and nobody ever believed her. My mom has a similar story after seeing something that looked like dodging stuff and then hitting a tree. She has told me that story so many times, but nobody believed her. Plasma balls are a real thing. In World War II, they would form on the wings of planes. Pilots called them, and other similar weird stuff, Foo Fighters. That's where the rock band got its name. They also form on spaceships, launching, and rarely on the ISS. They may also form quite frequently in the upper atmosphere and just float around and then dissipate. They are not well understood, to say the least. My grandmother witnessed it as a child, early 1930s, sat outside and watched a couple of orbs dancing in a tree in the yard until her nanny noticed, screamed, and pulled them into a storm cellar. I thought I saw some a year or so ago driving home on a stormy night, saw two tiny little sparks dancing in the trees in the dark, and stopped, only until I realized it wasn't a tree. It was kudzu grown up over a power line that was arcing. Slipped the car back into gear lickety-split and quick-like, and hauled ass home to make sure I could turn off appliances before the power went out. It was really pretty, though. Story 13. I swear I saw a cougar walking down the side of the road on my way home from my girlfriend's outside town at like 3 a.m. once. My mom saw a mountain lion in the middle of the night in Wichita, Kansas, when she opened the front door because she heard a woman screaming like she was being raped. Turns out it was the mountain lion that she was hearing, and it was facing off with the biggest tomcat that lived on our street. She said she doesn't care what anyone says. There are mountain lions in Kansas. LOL. ETA. This was the late 1980s. Since then, it's been more widely accepted. This is similar to what I was going to say. For me, it was driving along the Natchez Trace Parkway. It was late at night, and there weren't any other cars for miles. First, I saw the eyes glowing, then the distinctive face and paws as it walked along the road. Then I saw the body and giant tail flapping back and forth. From a Google search, it appeared to be a good 800 plus miles from its nearest known natural habitat. Same, but in a small town, Iowa, in the middle of the day, walking up the driveway of my aunt and uncle's neighbor. I just thought it was a really big cat. It walked into their backyard. My parents thought it was probably a golden retriever, as the neighbor did have one, but I remember the tail being a cat tail, not a dog tail. I mean, unless they buzz cut the tail of the dog. Now I know that occasionally the DNR releases one to help keep the deer population down, and it's kind of terrifying that I was within 20 feet of one as a small, unsupervised child. No one around here really knew that mountain lion's natural habitat is Iowa. The family and I were staying at an Airbnb near a little town not too far from Dallas for a wedding. The place was on a ranch in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by trees. As we were driving back from the wedding, we came around a curve in the road, and our headlights landed on a large, solid black cat in the road. This thing was easily the size of a Rottweiler. When it saw us, it arched its back like a house cat. My wife and I both exclaimed, "What the hell is that?" at the same time. Then it took off into the tree line. The only thing I can figure out is that maybe it was a panther, but there's not supposed to be any in that part of the country. Story 14. Driving on a semi-rural road south of Salem, Oregon about 15 years ago. I swear I saw some cryptid-looking bipedal wolf thing. My girlfriend at the time was with me and we both saw it. Didn't really talk about it, just kind of accepted we saw something we couldn't explain. I worked in Medford back in 2008 to 2010. I was doing a little weekend trip with a girlfriend at the time. We were on the 20 between Corvallis and Newport. We both saw a bipedal wolf thing also. He must have been a good 6 feet tall. We saw him running across the highway at dusk. When we passed the spot he crossed, we looked up into the trees and saw something glaring from the trees. We drove our asses off the rest of the evening. Yeah, this was in the middle of the night and it was crouched over something next to the road. Looked up and our headlights made our eyes shine red at us. It stood up and went into the brush, and I couldn't see it in the rearview mirror because it was so dark on that road. Glad I'm not the only one to see something like this in the area. Story 15. Thunder snow. In college, we had team workouts at 5:30 a.m. during the winter. When we emerged from our dorms, we were greeted by an absolutely insane lightning display combined with driving snow. The walk across campus was absolutely insane, like something from the day after tomorrow. When we finished the workout around 7, it had warmed up and had changed to rain and everything had melted. There were 25 guys on the roster and we all knew what we saw, but none of our friends believed us. Thanks for watching until the end. If you have a similar story to these that you would like to share with us, please leave it in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please leave us a like and subscribe. For more videos like this one right now, please stop by our channel. Thanks again, and see you next time.